All right, instigating women and friends. We've got me and Kate. It's 2025. We've taken a little break for a while now, I guess. Somewhat not intentional, but we've regrouped, recalibrated. Liz has decided to do her own podcast, so that's great. We're going to give Liz all kinds of props, and hopefully we can be guests on her podcast from time to time. And Kate and I have really decided to dig in to those topics that focus on women, those who identify as women, and sport of women, and continue to move into intimacy, sexual health, and then more things to come in the year. So I had been recommended a book to read last year called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, Ph.D., by a primary care female physician, and just loved it. It helped me to really understand some of what caused my intimacy to flame and move, and some of my desire and libido to rev up, and sometimes why it didn't. And we talked about it a little bit in a previous video and podcast. So I asked Kate, gave her a selection of books she might want to read to see what we could discuss here first in 2025. And she chose that one, Come As You Are. So first I want to ask Kate, what do you think of the book?
I thought it was good. Her writing style is a little interesting. She verbalizes sarcasm in her writing, which is it's a little different than most. So that makes it a little bit more fun. But it also kind of jars me from I'm talking about a serious topic and also a fun topic. So I thought it was good. There's a couple of elements that really spoke to me and have led to some experimentation as well. So the first thing that she kind of approaches is this idea of the accelerator and brakes. So what turns you on and what turns you off in the most basic of it. We all have accelerators and we all have brakes, and they're all unique to us. She likes to say we all have the same parts, but they're just arranged in a different way. And so the thing that she talks about with respect to accelerator and brakes is context. And that really kind of hit home to me from the standpoint of when you're younger, or when you're new in a relationship, or when you're before you have kids, or before you're, whatever, that context is different than what your context might be now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very interesting from just women are like, what changed? Why is it broken?
Your whole world.
Exactly. Your whole world did. And so for me, that idea of let's be really thoughtful about context, and thoughtful about stress, and thoughtful about why is vacation sex so much more prevalent and so much better than non-vacation sex, at least for me. And part of it is you're in a new place. It's exciting. You don't have as many demands on your time, or demands on you're just supposed to relax on vacation, right?
A little
You're supposed
privacy,
to, yeah,
probably.
right. And then that's different if you're vacationing with kids. But it can be a lot more exciting. And why date nights matter, right? Just mixing it up or whatever. So I like that. It led for me to kind of think back, okay, well, what used to turn me on? And if you remember, I don't know if you ever had this, Gwen, but there were letters to penthouse books.
Mm.
And I used to read those letters to penthouse books, and they were tintillation to me.
I didn't read a lot. I did not know they existed. So,
well, I shared with Tom, my husband, that, hey, I used to read these books. Maybe we could come into those books, and maybe we could read them together, and maybe it could be maybe it could lead to something fun. And so, bless his heart. And I was like, and I want you to buy it, because I don't want it. It feels weird to be I'm going to go buy something to be in kind of a solo situation so that then we can have sex. And if it's more like we're doing it together, then maybe it's more of a together thing, and that makes a big difference in my head.
Mhm.
So bless his heart, he goes and he looks around, and he something comes to the house, and he's like, it's the beginning of birthday month.
Oh,
That
that's
package is
right. February's birthday month for Kate. Happy birthday month.
thank you. So it's the beginning of birthday month. This package is for you. And I'm like, oh, cool. So he's got late meetings, whatever. And I go over and I open the package. And it is a Penthouse magazine
Oh.
titled Letters to Penthouse. And I'm like, oh, this is different than what I wanted. And yet he went out. So I'll describe them. It's your typical
Typical
nudie
penthouse.
magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah, typical penthouse. And I suppose it has letters in it. But it was not what I was asking for, which was the book of the letters. Because not that there's anything wrong with this. Other people might have very different opinions. But for me, I find those pictures a little bit demeaning to women. They do not turn me on.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, but he did something really nice.
Uh-huh.
And he does not look at porn, does not know a lot about porn. He's not, whatever. So he did something very nice and out of his comfort zone. And so I was like, ooh, how do I approach this?
Yeah.
So we sat down at dinner, got done with his meetings, and we ate dinner, and I was like, hey, so I opened my package, and he's like, oh, good. And I was like, so thank you, first of all, for doing that. It's incredibly sweet and kind and exactly what I asked you to go do. But can I show you what I was looking for instead? And he's like, sure. And we share an Amazon account with our kids, so we didn't want to buy it on our Amazon account. And I specifically was like, do not buy this on Amazon, because I didn't want the kids to be like, what's going on? Not that there's anything wrong with it, but, just didn't want to. And so I showed him what I was actually looking for. And so we found it on Thrift Books, and it's coming to the house. But he's like, he was hilarious. He was like, oh, what? You find those pictures demeaning? Of course you find those pictures demeaning.
He's like, I wondered what the hell you were thinking.
Exactly. But I tell that story not because I want to turn red on our podcast, but because
you are.
Yeah, exactly, because I am. But I tell that story because all of this works a lot better when you have a foundation of conversation and safety and vulnerability where you can say, I think I might like to try this. Would you participate with me in that?
Yeah.
And then when the other person does or doesn't, you can, in our case, correct the order, to make it so that someone doesn't feel badly that they went out and got you something that you didn't want because they didn't know what you actually wanted because you weren't as specific enough. But you can just, because it could have been like, hey, you got me the wrong thing. Well, you didn't tell me what you wanted. Right. And it could have been you never appreciate the things that I do for you. I went out of my way and and this is your fantasy anyway. It could have been all of that. And instead it brought us better together because I was able to share my feelings. He was able to, identify with those feelings. We were able to correct the order, and then recycle the Letters to Penthouse magazine.
There you go. You're right. It all comes down to communication.
Yes.
Communication. Yes.
Right. That ability to be vulnerable, to experiment, because I don't know if this is going to work, right? This is what I used to do when I was younger and single, right? This may not be something that works today, but I'm willing to experiment. I'm willing to play. And when I approach it in the sense of, let's go play, there's a lot less pressure on either person to perform or to meet an expectation that's there because we're just playing, right? We're
It's
just
just
figuring it out.
playing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're playing, you're planning,
Hmm.
communicating. Um, and I love that. It's that's another takeaway from her book is don't throw intimacy, sexual health into some belief that it's all about happenstance or it's only going to be hot and juicy if it's just spontaneous or if it's meant to be it'll just happen or somebody else will make it happen. That's not it. It's about you do reflect on what do you like, what did you used to like, and taking some action to make a plan, whether it's a date or playing
Yep.
something. Yeah, I love that.
The other thing that I thought, and I'm not sure if I marked the page for it. I'll do this brief. Um, and the idea that um, there is no way that you are going to want to get it on if you're stressed.
Mhm.
Um, and oh, maybe it was 86. I have that page in my head. So let me just briefly see if I could do that. Yes. The I'm not going to find it because I didn't have my highlighter on the plane. But anyway, the idea of there's when your body is stressed, that's like the ultimate break,
Yeah,
right? You can think about stress as the same thing as fear, right? Who doesn't want to be vulnerable and naked when you're fearful? This gal, I do not want to be vulnerable and naked when I'm in
oh,
fear or when I'm
nobody does.
in stress, when I'm got other things on my mind, right? That's armor time is
Yeah,
when you're stressed. And when you're under that chronic low grade stress, which happens in that everyday kind of stuff, right? That's the part where I was super dismissing, right? Because the stress that we feel today is not lions and tigers and bears. It's low grade lions and tigers and bears all the time.
constant
Yeah.
crying. Yes.
And that's the difference today is, we used to be able to release that stress by escaping the lion, getting the community together to go back out after the lion. And in this society, or in my experience, I'll use I words, right? We don't celebrate emotions. We don't allow for the release of them.
Mm-mm.
And we're not going through the stress cycle to get rid of it to then be ready for happy fun times.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm glad you brought that up. Emily, in her next book, says the response from this Come As You Are book, when she would then go to conferences, would generally be, yes, great book about intimacy, sex, and all the stuff. But the biggest takeaway was the stress cycle. Um,
Yeah.
and so let's touch on that for just a minute. You're exactly right. Our bodies were formed so that fight, flight, fear, freeze, our bodies would back in the day run back to the tribe or freeze and play dead. Our bodies were taking action to move the stress through our body. And we don't do that today. We just go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. And then we hit the bed exhausted, wake up. And so she talks about physical body movement is the number one way to close the stress cycle. But that doesn't mean you have to go run a marathon. It doesn't mean you have to even run. You can walk, you can dance. You can just do some sort of yoga, but it is intentionally moving your body. It also can be affection. So she
Mhm.
talks about long, slow kisses or long, slow bear hugs with somebody that you love and trust. And then in her next book, she even talks about people who absolutely don't want to move their body for some reason, or see that as just some other must do
Yeah.
checklist thing, and more stress. She says, lay on a bed, and take very long, slow 10-second chunks from your toes all the way up to the top of your head, squeezing those muscles and categories one at a time. But as you do that, think about the stress that you've just endured and in your mind, punch, kick, say whatever the hell you wanted to say and have that really stressful energy then leave your body. And so I think that's really critical. It's something we can all do in the morning when we're just waking up to make sure we've expended the stress from the previous day or at night before we go to bed, get it out of our bodies. And then maybe you do have a little bit of capacity for some sexy time.
What I really liked is her positioning of it is allowing yourself to go from a state of fear to a state of safety.
Yes.
Because that state of safety is then what's going to allow you to be open to the intimacy and the vulnerability of interacting with another person. And whether that is intimacy with a lover, or intimacy with a friend, like I can imagine that transition from I don't feel safe to I feel safe, or I'm home, or I'm in a safe space, to impact all sorts of your relationships.
Yeah.
Right. We all know that when we come home from work after having a really bad day and we're slamming doors and we're, slamming cabinets, we're flopping the pan on.
Rushy.
Yeah. Kicking the dog, whatever the case may be, right? That we're not the best human being to be around.
No.
And it's all that pent up anger or frustration or just feeling like the world is blah. It's getting that out and allowing our cycle to complete, to say, okay, now I'm in a safe space. Mm-hmm. And in the world today, that can be really hard, right? There's a lot of things coming at us, media wise, politics wise, whatever the case, job wise, fear around jobs. Mm-hmm. So we know that we're feeling that stress. It's the allowance of I'm going to use the feels word twice. We're getting that stress. We need to feel that stress. We need to complete the cycle of that stress to be in our safe space.
Yeah.
So that really spoke to me a lot, because I hadn't necessarily seen it positioned that way before.
Right. I agree. And that all relates back to context, which mm-hmm. you really started with as well. So, locking that into our minds, the context is up to us.
Yep. Yep. We create the context that we want around us.
Yeah. And it's not Mike's problem. It's not Mike's job to make sure the context is right for us. It's up to me.
Yeah. It's up to you to make sure that your context is right. It's up to him to make his context right. And then you come together and your contexts are all going to gel in a beautiful way.
And then magic can happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the third thing that struck me, and then I'll ask you what, your takeaways was around attachment theory. She's a really interesting way of approaching attachment theory that I hadn't seen before. And so for people who don't know, attachment theory is all about like how you grew up and when you were a baby and you were reliant on your parent to parent you and do all the things, give you food, give you shelter, give you solace, whatever. Your attachment process, that's not the right word, but you'll know what I mean. It depends on style, thank you, relies on, how you were parented and how you received that parenting. So there's avoidant, there's anxious, and then there's stable, I think, attachment style, those three. Anxious is, I'm afraid that this is going to go away. And that's what I had. I looked at love as it was a finite, it was a bowl of candy, right? It was the moment that it was gone, and I had to seize onto it, and I had to act out in order to get those displays of love. Avoidant attachment style is much more like, I'm not going to actually, commit myself or be vulnerable or be with you because that's scary. And then a healthy attachment style knows that love can come, love can go, right? Like the person can leave, the love is still there. It's, it's an infinite resource, that you don't run out of it. They trust that the person is going to be there for them. They trust that they're good enough that the person is going to be there for them. And she has a really interesting graph of like what it sounds like for each of them, so you can kind of, in a very unscientific manner, like think of what your attachment style might be. And then you can make some changes so that your relationship is healthier as you go back into secure attachment style, or migrate yourself back into secure attachment style. And I will tell you, being an anxious attachment style person made it really tough on my relationships, because I was constantly looking for that validation. And now that my attachment style is secure, there's a lot less drama. There's a lot less, some people get, kids do this too, right? They're looking for attention and they'll take bad if that's what they get, right? And so I would create this drama in my relationships. I would create I'd fight just to see, like, if, did the person really love me or do they care? And that made for a very tumultuous time that didn't necessarily result in really great intimacy.
Yeah.
So thought that was, secondary to sex and intimacy. The attachment aspect of relationships are so very important to figure out, like, what is it that you're creating in your relationships that are causing you issues.
Yeah. It's so nice to be able to put a label on that, to understand it.
Yeah.
I'm sure that anxious style is based in fear and stress. So then you're back to all that.
Yep, the avoidance as well, right? And so if we find ourselves chasing after someone, and why aren't they committing? Why aren't they committing? We might want to ask ourselves, well, do they have an attachment style that's not about me, but about them and how they can engage with people in an intimate situation?
Yeah. Great. Love it.
So those are my three. What did you have?
Oh, one that I really like, that I think is important, especially for women to understand, is the difference between arousal, pleasure, and desire.
Yeah.
And so she made it really clear our bodies can be aroused just by noticing that something sexy is in the air, or I'm looking at something sexy, or there's sexual tension. So women can get wet and their clit can get aroused. Men can get an erection just because of what's going on. That does not mean that they are looking for sex, that they're ready for sex. And I think that's important because there are people who have encountered sexual trauma who beat themselves up and blame themselves because they were indeed wet or erect. Those are different things. It's just your body responding to a stimulus.
Yeah.
Pleasure is I like something. I like this and I like that. And I like how she drew that out, because a lot of times we don't know what we like. So I think going through some of that mental gymnastics to understand and then communicate, what we really like is critical.
Yeah.
And then desire comes from, what do I want? So I might know I like something, but I still may not desire that or want that in that particular context. So she's used an example like getting tickled. I might like to get tickled in the right fun, safe, goofy environment privately, with my friends, family, husband, whatever. But I might not want to get tickled when I come home, I'm in a bad mood and someone's trying to cheer me up. It's like the wrong thing, or in public, that kind of thing. So same with sex. And she talks a lot about focus on your own pleasure, focus on what you really like. Then I like that she talked about with desire or libido. There are two types. One is spontaneous, which is what's portrayed in all the movies. People just can't get enough of each other and rush together.
Zero foreplay.
Foreplay. This is thought action. And that does happen for maybe 50% of the population. I don't know, but a good chunk. But the other 50% or so, whatever it is, are more responsive in their desire. So for those people, which I'm one of, it takes pleasure, it takes thinking about, it takes almost a little bit of, oh, something that I might plan could be very pleasurable later. And that pleasure kind of starts to simmer into the desire and libido. And I like that because I think a lot of women tend to beat themselves up because they might not have as much desire as their partner does. I was one of those people. And now that I know, I'm just responsive. Now, I've also changed from thinking I needed to respond to whatever Mike does to taking accountability for that myself. I need to know what brings myself pleasure. I need to put that in motion. I might need to
Mhm.
put that in motion earlier in the day or earlier in the week and look forward to something. And then by the time that moment happens, I'm ready to go.
Exactly.
Before it was my libido sucks. I never wanted as much as he does. What's wrong with me? Am I a typical woman that's overworked, overstretched with kids, too rushing around, and I've lost it forever? And now I really take, a lot of comfort in knowing, no, I just have to do things a little differently.
Yeah, I think what came up for me during that part of the book and the discussion is that a slow burn, right? It's that like or the water heater that has a slow pilot light, or it's a big water heater, but there's a small pilot light that's heating it. And it takes time and it takes energy and it takes effort. And all of that means that you're okay taking up space, that it's okay that you've got a slow burn because it's okay, right? If you need a bath, if you need, oils, if you need a massage, if you need whatever, don't feel bad for those things. It's perfectly okay. And in fact, a lover that's worth your time and effort will respond to those things.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because they want someone who is just as responsive as they are.
Mhm.
And you're, different, but similar in your goals. You both want that intimacy.
Mhm. And it's perfectly fine to say no or not now. And
Mm-hmm.
all of this doesn't have to lead to penetration of any sort. That, it can just lead to intimacy, snuggle time. I like how she's clear and consistent throughout the book that all this means is get in your bed under the covers and either with yourself, just enjoy some pleasure and see what happens or not. It's okay. Or get in bed under the covers and snuggle with somebody skin to skin. And remember, ooh, I like this. This is pleasurable. And then see what
Yeah.
happens. You don't have to overthink.
Yep. This can be as simple as holding each other's hands while you watch TV.
Mhm.
Skin to skin touch is really super important in just creating that intimacy of, we're two human beings who enjoy each other.
Mhm. I also like how she says most women need lube. So just buy the freaking lube. It's not a
Exactly.
menopause thing. If you are pleased by something and your desire is shifting up, but your body is not responding for whatever reason, get the freaking lube or lotion or oil or whatever and go for it. You're
Yeah.
not broken.
No. And by the way, there's nothing better than breaks that come from pain, right? So,
Right.
this is not a failure on your part because whatever, you didn't get wet. This is about making it so that, we have, it's not like these things were just invented, right? This has been around for a long time. Leverage the tools that we have. And you can enhance your satisfaction by using it in new and different ways. Maybe you like it on the nipple, maybe whatever. You can experiment with whatever you want, and it can be another way of playing to figure out what your pleasure is.
Mhm. Yes. And then she did talk about the three realms of shame, and I don't remember that there were three M's. The first relates to, I don't know, ministry or the church, the shame
Mm.
that
Yep.
comes from how
Yeah.
we grew up. We've
Yep.
definitely,
Media.
media is another one, which we talked about a little bit. Media makes it out to you need hot, juicy, instant sex, or you're doing it wrong and you're broken. Not true. And the third is medical. And, I always hone in on that with a great focus and just to test that medical for a very, very, very long time just assumed a body was a body. Um, the clit was not mapped out until the late 90s, and it wasn't until like 2005 till it was put into the Journal of Urology by a female doctor out of Australia. 2005, Kate. It's just beyond me. So the clit is much more than that nub. It is a very large internal organ with more neurons, neuroplasticity, all the stuff than even the penis holds. And yet there's just no knowledge about it. I worked in healthcare a long time. The women's units were all about OBGYN having a baby. After childbearing years, there was very, very much a gap in
Yeah.
terms of knowledge, resources, services. It's improving. But I love these kind of conversations because I really want all women to know that, it's you shouldn't be dead to medical care once you are finished having children, or if you've never had children, or if your uterus is gone for whatever reason. And that's how it's felt for a really long time.
Agree. You shouldn't, not exist and not take up space. And you should also realize that you got to know your own stuff and how it works because it's not like anybody else has a lot of research out there to tell you, right? It's up
Right.
to our own responsibility to understand how our bodies work.
Yes.
Um,
We've got the estrogen and the progesterone and the testosterone mix that changes all throughout the month. And all those things, plus many other things, make women's bodies unique from male bodies. And there's a whole lot in between. So that's the last thing I'll really highlight is she discusses at the very beginning that, in utero, all of our cells are very, very much alike. Our DNA is very, very much alike. And we, as women, had cells that just evolved into a clit and a uterus and a vagina and a vulva. But men, those who identify as men, have those same cells. They just evolved into different pieces and parts. So she talks a lot. I've got the thing, her little, we're all made of the same parts, organized in different ways.
yeah. And that's why I think like we don't talk about this a lot, but the identity, we talk about people who identify as women, right? We all have the same parts organized in a different way that can be associated with how we identify and can also be not associated with how we identify.
Right.
So, the that 2 second version of like, oh, it's a boy or it's a girl that doctors do at the beginning of the day, right? There is no genetic testing done. There very rarely is there genetic testing done. Very rarely is there, I'm going to stare at my kid's genitals and make sure. And then there's nothing that we can do until later in life when they decide, what it is that they actually feel more like. So, we include people who are women who identify as women who maybe their stuff was arranged in a way that that they don't necessarily identify with because these topics are universal.
Yes, they are. They're very much about not only medicine, but culture, how
Mm-hmm.
we all grew up. And so I'll just finally mention that she also has a workbook. So Come As You Are workbook. And I flipped through it and there is one story that relates to what we were just talking about that she offers, which comparing and contrasting culturally, uh, one of her people at a conference came up afterwards and says, I saw an example of my adult brother who was diapering his young baby, female baby.
Mm-hmm.
And when the baby female was dry and back to happy, she put her hand down between her legs. And
Hmm.
her adult brother says, "Oh, no, 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 we don't do that." And the sister at the conference said, so I'm sitting here wondering, what if that baby had been a boy? What would that dad have said? Would he have said the same thing? What if the mom had been changing the diaper? Would she have said the same thing? That just brings up how culturally ingrained it is that women don't touch our own bodies, don't even know what they look like down there, and we should.
Yeah.
She contrasted that with a therapist friend of hers who had a 2-year-old girl. And the 2-year-old had one of those bouncy balls between her legs one day and was, just playing and grinding on the ball. And she said, "Ooh, mommy, I like this spot between my legs." And her mom, as a therapist, said, "Yes, that's your clitoris. It's a really fun part." And the girl goes, "Yeah, this is my favorite part." So the differences we can all make in our own lives, but also our kids' lives, as culturally we start to embrace this empowerment of knowing our bodies, taking accountability for our own bodies, and communicating our pleasures, desires, plans. I think it's just critical.
I agree. To add on with a personal story around masturbation, when I was probably, I don't know, 12 or 13 in school, we were having an awards ceremony for maybe it was even high school. But we were having an award ceremony in the cafeteria in my high school. And parents were there and siblings were there. And I remember a good friend of mine's younger sister was over like in the middle of our cafeteria was the kind where the benches would come, like, slide the benches down,
Oh, okay.
and then you could put the benches back up. So we were all like kind of off in there was a big thing in the middle and we were on either side as we saw the person up front handing out the awards. Well, she was in the middle and kind of the back, just masturbating to no one's end, this big thing. And it's like there's not like mood lighting or like stage lighting or anything. It's just like this bright cafeteria. It might as well have been daylight in there. And I kept expecting, as as a high schooler, I kept expecting someone to go get that child and be like, "We don't do that in public." And the mom was just like, "Whatever. I mean, she's 4, right? She's
Right.
enjoying her body, right? No one made a big deal out of it whatsoever."
All right.
And even though my instinct was like, we should probably
Would
go
that
get her out
help?
of the yeah, but it showed me that, like, no, masturbation isn't something that we need to hide around the corner, right? It's that eventually learn that you shouldn't probably have your pieces parts out and about, and definitely not as an adult, right? That can be arrested, that can lead to bad
That
results.
can be
But
problems.
yeah, and certainly consensual is best. But like when you're 4 and you're just exploring your body and you find something that's new and nice, it's okay. It's absolutely okay. And I like that has stuck with me for a really long time, of like, what an amazing mom to be like,
Yeah.
whatever. I'm not gonna go make her feel bad.
No, don't traumatize her for the rest of her life as a
Right.
4-year-old.
Hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Love that. So again, the main sections are we're all made of the same parts, organized in different ways. And there's a sexual accelerator and a brake. Most people don't think about the brake, but a lot of the context relates back to the brakes. We need to understand what we each have. Pleasure, desire, and genital response are not the same thing. So we talked about that today. Arousal non-concordance is normal. And that's what I mean when you might be in a sexual situation and your arousal or your body either gets erect or wet. And that does not mean it's non-concordance with your desire for pleasure, sex, intimacy, those sorts of things. Responsive desire is normal. That's what I talked about when I said I'm more a responsive desire. I need to plan and think ahead. And perhaps above all, context shapes our access to pleasure. And Kate
Yeah.
touched on that really well at the beginning. So, good stuff. Great way
Yeah.
to start off the new year.
Yeah. I think back to, a lot of the clients that I have around, what is your communication with your intimate partner?
Mhm.
And that being super foundational to being able to even start this journey with another person. You can certainly start it on your own, but if you're going to have some interaction with another person, having that communication, that foundation of trust, the ability to not blame and to be vulnerable is just super important as we go through this.
It is. So, I'm hearing that you would recommend this for people to read.
Yeah, for sure. I think it would. There's in the book. There's also like little worksheet areas that you can copy down or exercises that she gives you, and I think it's a good way to become acquainted with your own body at whatever stage it is.
And give us language for things that are kind of, we're wondering about that we don't know others are working
Yeah.
through as well. Well, good, because I was a little concerned last night. I was looking at some of the book reviews. One of them gave her a 4 out of 10, somewhat to what you talked about in terms. There's a little snarky behavior there. There's a little repeat, but also a lot of her citing other people's research and summarizing it. And they felt like that was kind of cheating. But in my mind, it's a really good bringing together of a lot of great research about women, intimacy, sexual health that isn't in other places.
Yeah. I mean, the attachment theory stuff I've never seen represented in an intimacy and sexual manner. And it is paramount, right? If you're constantly either avoiding a relationship with someone or you're constantly thinking that it's going to go away, that's not a safe place to operate from, right? So that it behooves us to work on that. And yes, that I can't remember who was the first one to do attachment theory. Um, uh, Karen Honig, maybe. Um, but this is a great take on it. So I think that when you can bring different aspects of research together and give a new perspective on it and organize it in a way that's helpful for people is always a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. So at any age, at any stage, this is a great book for when you're asking yourself, what the hell is wrong with me?
Because nothing's wrong with you.
Nothing's wrong with you. It's all
Nothing's wrong with
normal.
you. You're normal.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you've made it to normalcy. Yay.
Yeah. Whoa.
All
And
right.
if you want to make a change, you can make effort towards those changes, but it's helpful to figure out that you're coming from a place of normalcy um, and headed to a place of normalcy. It's just different than where you are today.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. It was really helpful. Talk soon.
Sounds good.